That was an interesting time to have one of our little cutouts. I'm going to be going through part 3 of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 82. Okay, if you haven't watched part 1, in part 1 we covered how you can follow the stablecoin market and the Bitcoin market to understand what's happening this week in Bitcoin and how it relates to the macro environment. In part 2, we covered what's happening in Japan, how that relates to US, and then we went through the big, beautiful bill, and finally the latest in the tariffs. You can go back and watch this week in macro of Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 82. Now we're going to go through this week in geopolitics, where we're going to break it down into 3 parts in this week in geopolitics. I'm going to give a little bit of background on the multipolar world order, the predictions that I've been making to get people ahead of in preparing for a world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. I'm going to give a little bit of background on what's happening in the region, in the African nations, when you follow the money. And then we're going to go through the real reason and get through all the BS of why there was a humiliation ritual in the White House, similar to Zelensky, but this time with the president of South Africa. We'll watch that together. And then I'm just going to go through the final part where we cover a little bit of what to expect next. Then we're going to wrap up and we'll catch up again next week. Okay. So a little bit of background before we start going into the video. Soon we're going to go over to the video, watch it together. But a little bit of recap. If you want to go deep into this subject, you can go through, check out my blog. You can go through previous episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk. But as a quick recap, I believe through the proof of weapons network, with the equivalent of BlackRock as CEO, which is a distributed network, we are transitioning to a multipolar world order, MWO. And this is using certain states in order to execute this vision. The US is the largest proxy state for the BlackRock portfolio companies. In order to execute this transition, it already controls the European Union through the ECB and the EU. It already controls UK, Bank of England, and their politicians are just simply work for corporate interests, the portfolio companies of BlackRock. And that's why you have these war escalations and sacrifices, because essentially UK and European Union are vassal states for extracting resources, and they were the beta for what they're currently doing in America, and they're transitioning into different blocks. These blocks are headed by sovereign nations that are actually sovereign and can compete with the $20 trillion of assets that BlackRock has under management with Vanguard and State Street. And that is China, which remains sovereign because it has it doesn't have a Fed style central bank. It doesn't have banks as shareholders. It has a state banking system which remains control with capital controls and a sovereign wealth where it's built vast gold reserves and $3 trillion in order to protect itself through that. China heads up the BRICS corridor, which unified in order to take on the US dollar proof of weapons network. It partnered with the sovereign wealth of what's called the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, headed by Saudi Arabia, and the vast sovereign wealth that did not concede to having Western central banking system and maintained nationalization of its key assets so it could use it in the sovereign interest rather than securitizing it, financializing it, where it becomes owned by the asset managers. And then you create a stateless power structure like BlackRock that is more important than the US government, the European Union, and the UK government, because they can use the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, and the Federal Reserve to usher in wealth confiscation to its network of banks that are public companies and controlled at the asset management level. Because of that, the GCC is heading up one of the blocks of this multipolar world order. And these sovereign wealth funds, which Trump was pitching to for the BlackRock portfolio companies last week, you've got those power blocks. And several wars were fought in order to weaken nations, test the world order, and that culminated in the essentially the genocide in Gaza and the Ukrainian war, which is essentially BlackRock controlling all the land, all the rare earth minerals for its portfolio companies, and making a shit ton of money out of selling weapons for the military industrial complex. And you can use NATO, you can use the CIA, you can use the deep state, and you can usher in the manufacturing and agitations, and you can use USAID in order to funnel media narratives into making the people believe that they're defending democracy, or the Muslims are trying to kill the Jews and you need to protect the Jews. The different narratives that are needed so you can manufacture consent, which leads to you losing your rights, having a shit ton of inflation, your wealth being confiscated because they can justify the confiscation of wealth to these large corporate contracts. Crony capitalism at its highest. Now, these different blocks are going to be investing in the global south. The global south, including regions like the African nations and many, many different areas, have always been subject to colonization by either the previous European empires or the British Empire or the French Empire or the Portuguese Empire or the Spanish Empire, and that subsided to the US covert empire, which I've covered, which we could call the US deep state, which is essentially a power structure that was created after World War II, and I've covered it in more detail in previous episodes. Because we now have a sovereign BRICS corridor led by China and a sovereign GCC corridor led by Saudi Arabia and Qatari UAE wealth as well, sovereign wealth, they're going to be investing in the global south, which is leading to a series of events to decolonize US foreign policy and retreat it into a regional power where it will be utilized to host this technocracy, AI, robotics, and then you have different types of blocks. The export countries, which is represented by ASEAN, the ASEAN nations, headed up by Singapore because it has its own sovereign wealth, will be the distressed companies that BlackRock's trying to acquire for its large portfolio companies through the tariff policies by creating distress in the export-dependent, weakened, vassalized nations, which were the victims of many of the different wars, either the Vietnamese wars or the Korean wars or the Japanese wars with the Bank of Japan and the Korean Central Bank. Those ones that are just policy of the IMF, the Federal Reserve, the Bank for International Settlements, you can essentially go through an M&A spree and acquire those companies up, which is what the tariff policy does, and consolidate wealth and control ports. It's why you see negotiations right now between, for example, UAE, which has been investing in many ports, BlackRock, which has been using the wars that US creates to acquire many ports, and China, which is sovereign wealth, is negotiating all of these ports. Because you've got, those are the power structures, which is going to be splitting the wealth across a multipolar world order, as the US is no longer global hegemon, because it's at the end of the debt-based Ponzi scheme, and it's being strategically weakened into civil unrest, just as they did in Europe and UK. So with that in mind, we need to have somebody join the White House as a token understanding of what the global South is meant to do next so that it doesn't happen to them. And this is why I think we had the South African president visit just after Elon Musk was allowed to acquire X. We get freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. And suddenly Elon Musk, that comes from South Africa, apartheid South Africa, comes out and through X releases this concept of the white genocide. And so this white genocide is trying to manufacture a narrative because there is really bad crime in South Africa, corruption, crime. I have no doubt that's happening. But if you listen to anyone, both on the white side or the black side, they will share that these crimes are happening, and it's not a racial crime. It is just crimes that are happening that are trying to get under control. And there are different political parties that have different types of extremism from the apartheid South Africa, and therefore they still have a presence in the new democracy setup that was set up, and that the president of South Africa tried to explain. Now, do I believe everything he's saying? Of course not. Do I believe there's rampant corruption and all sorts of stuff? Of course I do. Do I believe that these murders are happening? Well, I have every reason to believe it. Do I know all the intricate details? Well, I know that when you get those intricate details, you end up in narrative type of territory. You can't tell the difference between the propaganda. And then all I end up doing is, it's not a perfect science, is following the money to understand what is actually happening. What I do know is that Elon Musk, who represents the military-industrial complex and all its technology, was pushing out this narrative of a white genocide. And it culminated into this meeting. And so this meeting, we have the South African White House visit. And this is meant to set the tone for the global South's relationship with America, i.e., let's do another humiliation ritual, just like we did with Zelensky. And the global South can all watch, and then we can redistribute trade routes, redistribute relationships over to BRICS, where these types of humiliation rituals don't happen. So there's another very important part of this. And this is where I think it leads into, which we'll be watching together, the very controlled civil narratives that are being used in order to control people, psychologically weaken them, and basically the atrocities and various other things that we're seeing that may or may not be false flag operations, but are certainly being weaponized in order to create civil unrest and manufacture that. I'm very familiar with it because I've seen it, whether you see World Economic Forum operations like George Soros and open border policies, and racial tensions and religious tensions, and using the CIA, MI6, Mossad being used in order to pay media to push out different narratives. We've covered this in the past and we've seen it before. But I want you to recognize the pattern, because I need you to be mentally strong, because there are very significant operations to weaken you mentally. And we're going to go through that in This Week in Geopolitics. But anyway, what is South Africa doing leading into this meeting? Well, South Africa is heading up the genocide case in the International Criminal, the ICJ, the highest court in the world, where it was ruled, even though Israel tried to assassinate and Mossad tried to assassinate one of the judges came out, the 16 judges, one of them said their family was threatened, even though they still ruled that this is a plausible genocide. And we've seen everything to back that up since. Now, Israel, a proxy of America, a proxy of BlackRock, which has banks and all the military-industrial complex all within its portfolio, through this network that has no accountability to Congress, Senate, prime ministers, judicial, has more power than the government, is set to be sued for this genocide and also massive reparation payments. And they need their largest proxy, US, to be distanced from it, which is why I believe that Israel is going to be strategically dumped in favor of the GCC. And I've covered this in previous episodes as well, which makes me believe that everything we're seeing right now, while everyone's talking about going to war with Iran, I'll cover this after we do watch the video together. It's actually just the negotiations that are being had. And I'll go through that, and that's where we're going to end this. But what is it that South Africa represent? The genocide case. And so Trump sued the court, saying we're going to sanction the court to try and distance. And then Trump needed to distance America from Israel so that the military companies can distance themselves for profiting from the genocide as well. And so this is a strategic part of that. So there's multi different facets to this. Of course, they're not going to tell you any of this. But I believe this is ahead of the regime change that I think is going to be happening in Israel, while the military, no, I won't go deeper into that. Let's save that. I don't want to go too deep as well. So they are concerned about other things as well for the BlackRock portfolio companies. In South Africa, there was a big case around Elon Musk wanting to have Starlink. Starlink, which relates to the satellites which the big beautiful bill has got budget towards, which we know anything to do with Elon Musk, the PayPal mafia, and also Peter Thiel from Palantir, the AI technology. Anything to do with that, you know, is a backdoor for military industrial complex, as Snowden released to us, around surveillance. And you use terror in order to usher in legal changes. And you are utilizing technology in order to build the next wave for the space Cold War that they can profit from, the next ideology. And this is what Elon Musk is about. Now, they wanted to install Starlink, which is satellite-based internet in South Africa. It's really expensive. Most people can't afford it. It would be only the rich people. So rather than having $50 a month, it would be like $500 a month. So, but you can install it for surveillance reasons. Why? Because South Africa is the S in BRICS. And BRICS unified around relationships with China, relationships with Russia, Brazil, India. And then you had the other members join, like Iran, Indonesia, UAE, Egypt, very strategic points in the GCC, and various other parts. So they need Starlink to be installed like it is in Ukraine for the AI military industrial complex and the social credit scores and the stablecoin standards and the oligarchy controlled technocracy that they're currently building within BlackRock's host state, America. And so installing Starlink is an important resistance against BlackRock gaining some strategic tension against China, which is sovereign and is the nation state of BRICS. So you need to get the S. I covered previously why the I, India, and the Pakistan escalation and how they profited from that. You can go back to previous episodes. We broke it down. If you want to go to that, just go to Simon Dixon on YouTube and you can look for all the videos. We broke them down into sections, so you don't need to watch the whole thing. There was one on how BlackRock's involvement in Ukraine, Israel, and the Pakistan-India escalation as well. So Starlink is US military tech with Elon as the front, and that is important to get as much escalation for the upcoming Cold War narrative between Russia and America through space colonization, hence the Trump narrative of we're going to the moon. So all of this plays into why South Africa is the most important. You've got the global South narrative, which is pushing people away from America and over to BRICS, weakening America as a sovereign nation over to state, BlackRock controlled nation, using Trump as the narrative pusher. And you can have installation of the technology that's needed. And so if South Africa says we're not putting in Starlink, we're working with China instead through BRICS, then you try and create a scenario where you can get that technology and a narrative that's needed. And so we create the white genocide concept. So because there are crimes and murders that are happening to both black people and white people on farms, you say it's just happening to white people. You get Elon Musk to push that narrative out. You can radicalize people into white nationalists, a big chunk of Trump's fan base that were part of the MAGA crew. You can bring them on board, fuel racial tensions, strategically get the surveillance state, the law changes that are needed, and you can take away South Africa's nationalized internet service provider that provides cheap internet at $50 or whatever it may be, and you can take away that infrastructure so that you can build a surveillance state through Starlink. This is the next phase of the space Cold War I've been predicting and talking about, because America is strategically retreating from the region. And so this is all about, the decolonization from US colonization and all the resource extraction. And remember the different industries that are in South Africa, like Blood Diamond. That is, Cecil Rowe through De Beers, that is essentially stealing diamonds through mass exploitation of South Africans via Israel, so that it can be sold in stores across America, Europe. And you had the French Empire, the remnants of that, through oil companies like Total and Shell in the British Empire that need these partnerships. And you have Blood Diamond in the scammy industry called diamond. By the way, diamonds are the worst type of investment. If stock to flow is what drives it, and Bitcoin grows value through ultimate scarcity, and gold has less scarcity, 2% increase, and silver has less because it's become a manufacturing, and so they're worse and worse stores of value. Diamonds is the worst because there's infinite supply, and now they got technology where they can be manufactured through labs as well. It was always a scam, but that was an industry that came through these blood diamond industry and mass exploitations. So you got all of that background. You still got people in charge. You got those power struggles. And what was the resistance against it? Well, you had, the end of apartheid. And then there were laws that were implemented around land reform because those that colonized had all the land. So they introduced whatever their politics, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, they've been building that up and building that up. And what happened? In Africa, you had a decolonization exercise as a result of that. So NATO comes along and decides to end any attempt at decolonization. So what did you have? You had Gaddafi. Gaddafi in Libya said that he would like to create a sovereign, pan-African, gold-backed national currency so that the colonizers could stop stealing their resources through violence, exploiting through their proxies like Israel. And Gaddafi wanted to resist against that. And so you are told that Gaddafi is a dictator and you're protecting democracy. And suddenly NATO comes along, which is a sales strategy for the military-industrial complex, and says that we're saving the people of Libya, which has been a civil war, death, destruction, raping, pillaging, taking over of the central bank, stealing of the gold, all of that. And it's still in that right now. And so Gaddafi is taken out. An operation by funding groups leads to Arab Spring. Arab Spring leads taking over those groups, infiltrating them, creating so-called quote-unquote Islamist terrorism, which is funding those groups that the West created, like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, in order to create civil unrest. And then you can justify the NATO war saying, we are taking out Islamist terrorism. you take out and you wipe out Gaddafi to make sure that that currency never happens. And then more and more unrest is happening so that you can continue to take over those resources and have covert colonization. You know, the covert colonization continued during the American Empire. And this is why nobody falls for this narrative if you're in the global south, because they know that there's no white genocide. They know what this game is. And so if you are in the global south, what's your reaction? Your reaction is that, you know, this is bullshit. And so it's a signal, work with China, don't work with America. So that ushers in and helps that narrative. So yeah, you know, that was the history. You got the Pan-African currency. Now, what happened as the resistance against that? You had BRICS unifying South Africa, aligning with China, Russia, India, and Brazil to say, can we pull together and decolonize? And then China saying, okay, I've got a manufacturing base. I'd like to hedge away from the dollar. I'd like to hedge away from American consumption, which is 10 to 15% of our exports, and invest and build up your countries. And yeah, we can, it might be a bit more exploitative. We won't kill you, regime change you, fund militia groups, and, you know, have covert regime changes and wars, death, destruction. We won't do any of that. But we'll build and invest in some of your infrastructure so that you can then become a developed nation and buy some of our goods, and we can partner in that infrastructure. Was there elements of exploitation? I'm sure. So China came along and launched the Belt and Road Initiative. And there was a strategy for these nations decolonizing and becoming sovereign. And this started to work across the region because there was a competing de-dollarization. And less of them were using dollars. More and more of them were joining BRICS, and more of them were receiving investment and building their manufacturing base. But the next phase for them was to build real wealth within the region. And that was by having a new model, which is, okay, China, America wants their iPhones, you know, their iPhones. You're manufacturing them. You're using our resources. We would like you to build your factory in Africa. And rather than America stealing, rapage, pillaging, and creating violence with our resources by funding militia groups and pretending they're fighting terrorism, we'll negotiate with you and you can invest and not do that. But there's an element of exploitation. But we can play off China and America and say, which one of you would like to build your factory where you can actually train our people and use our resources and pay tax in our country, and we will sell you the finished product, and we can trade and work together. And that was working, so that finally the African nations could be completely decolonized. And this is a big threat to the dollar system and the dollar proof of weapons network. So China was investing in the technology and infrastructure. Various African regions were fighting back with their own model, and BRICS was the resistance against that. And all of the rare earth minerals and much of the rare earth minerals that are needed for all of these components to win the AI and robotics race, they had a model for actually becoming sovereign again. And this is what is being disrupted right now, because several countries tried that strategy. And when they tried that strategy, it started to work. Now, this is why you suddenly got ISIS and Al-Qaeda across these African nations. Because who are those? Those are proxies via Israel for ISIS and America via Al-Qaeda for creating violence in order to colonize. And so what did we see? And then we'll go through the video. We saw Mali. Suddenly you get ISIS and Al-Qaeda. You have these campaigns, these destabilization campaigns from the West. And then in 2022, because they partnered with or worked with BRICS or various parts of BRICS, They managed in 2022 to expel the French forces right after a military coup against that. And so the French troops, they fully withdrew, and Mali basically turned to working with Russia's Wagner group, and their forces were able to get the support that they needed. We then start to see the same in Burkina Faso. We'll cover this in another time. What is the narrative we're being told right now? Trump says, I'm doing precision strikes into Somalia to take out ISIS. And then we start hearing about all this new ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Burkina Faso. And we're told it's those Islamist terrorists that you create that have got nothing to do with Islam, that you can use that narrative to create civil unrest in your own country. And so in 2023, we started to see expulsion in Burkina Faso of French forces. It essentially was echoing Mali's model. And French troops left within the months of this request. And he created a model that didn't need to work with Russia, but they could build their manufacturing base. And they didn't need IMF money. And they may not have needed. They were able to partner to rebuild that. And so we've had about 20 assassination attempts against them. And now the latest thing we hear is that ISIS and Al-Qaeda there is the Islamist terrorists. We know how this works by now if you've been watching Bitcoin Hard Talk. What about Niger? Same thing happened. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, linked violence. This is a destabilization campaign from the West. In July 2023, they have a military coup because they partner with BRICS. The GCC starts working as well. And that's why they're becoming a broker between BRICS and America and the West as well. You expel the French forces. European is getting weakened and weakened and weakened. You had the same in Chad. They haven't quite done it yet. They haven't expelled the French, but there's a growing tension in order to try and achieve a similar things. And so the US no longer needs EU for plausible deniability because EU is no longer strong, because French is no longer able to colonize, because BRICS is fighting back. So what do? You launch a couple of operations, and that's where you saw the installation of Zelensky to get the rare earth minerals, get the land controlled by BlackRock, get strategic escalations, weaken Europe so that you can then negotiate directly with the GCC and BRICS as your proxy. BlackRock, which controls the US government, strategically weaken Europe, blow up Nord Stream pipeline, switch off the cheap gas from Europe that builds up the manufacturing base of Germany, switch off the nuclear energy, do a nuclear deal with Saudi and Iran. Are you starting to see how this all comes together when these power structures really do it? And everything is just narrative control for the profits of the proof of weapon network, with BlackRock as its CEO right now. Then you have another operation. What's Operation 2? So why did you have the humiliation ritual where Zelensky was invited? He handed over the military industrial complex for another $1 trillion over to Europe. And that's what that ritual was about. It's all theatrics, narrative control to put a suitable narrative on what BlackRock portfolio companies are doing to steal your money through the proof of weapons network as well. So this operation, I believe, was to draw all of the global south closer to China and BRICS, which is the multipolar world order that I believe BlackRock is invested in. And so you need the myth of a white genocide. And then you use it for another asset, because everybody knows that the real genocide that's happening right now is in Gaza via US proxy Israel, via BlackRock proxy US, via military industrial complex proxy Netanyahu, and financial banks and BlackRock and asset management proxy Trump, competing with GCC and BRICS as well. And we all know that that's the real genocide, and it's South Africa that brought the case against it. So this is gaslighting for all of the people that have been traumatized, and I'll go through that after the video, so that they can manufacture the civil unrest and mental illness and civil violence that they need within America to strategically weaken it to get this surveillance state that they actually need. Now, the global south doesn't fall for the PR that America and Europe may fall for. And so what does this do? It is basically all about the war, energy, and the reconstruction contracts and everything that are needed. So suddenly the South African Prime Minister turns up and he gets his humiliation ritual. And we're going to go through that now. And when you follow the money, it's just obvious why this is happening. The rest of it is just theater. And you're a tool and a pawn in pushing the narrative that's going to work against your interest, while the rest of the world gets closer to the global south and the BRICS multipolar world order. Right, so Azad, we're going to go through this live interview together. So Azad's going to play it now. I haven't watched the whole thing. I just saw some of the highlights. Things are moving so fast, I haven't had time. So we might skip through some parts of it. But let's watch this together. And then after that, I'll give a bit of commentary. I'll show you how how you can reinterpret this so you can do it yourself when you follow the money. And then finally, I'll go through just the final games that are being played with the GCC and an important message around your mental strength, your psychological strength, based upon the ratcheting up of civil unrest so you can keep yourself, because it's very important you keep yourself protected during that. And then that's going to wrap it up for Bitcoin Hardtalk episode 82. So Azad, we've already been through the intro, the rigmarole, the niceties. They were getting on nicely. And then suddenly it goes into the humiliation ritual, the sabotage. And so let's watch that right now, and I'll stop it after a few minutes. And we'll see what bits we can skip through so that you can see this in real time to see once you know this stuff, you can't undo it. So Azad, let's go into the South African president, humiliation ritual, and the sabotage.
We turn the lights down, and just put this on. It's right behind you, Johan.
There's nothing this parliament can do, with or without you. People are going to occupy land. We require no permission from you, from the president, from no one. We don't care. We can do whatever you want to do. Who are you to tell us whether we can occupy land or not? We are going to occupy land. Yeah. South Africa, occupy land. That's who we are. Honorable member, want to do. I can withdraw my membership from this useless parliament. Honorable. Yes, honorable member. Must never be scared to kill. A revolution demands that at some point there must be killing, because the killing is part of a revolutionary act. Shoot to kill, Yamaza. Kill the poor, the farmer. Kill the poor, the farmer.
Okay, what I really wanted to do is I didn't want to watch the video, and so we're watching this in real time, so it's going to be a little bit of struggle to get through it. But leading up to this, they're talking normally, and then Trump suddenly says, brings up this concept of white genocide. And I don't want, you can watch this video on X where they go through like the different songs and various other things. But he's playing all of the evidence to say that there is a white genocide. Now, what he holds up bits of paper. And again, from people that I've spoken to, people involved in these matters, it's going to change the lighting a little bit. Now we're getting a little bit darker. That's how you know we're doing this in real time. They said some of the pictures were from Congo and Congo M23. We've covered that. That's Western militia groups via Rwanda in order to steal resources that leads to mass killing. So they take up some of those photos. And as I said, I genuinely believe there is violence, corruption, murders that is happening. They don't deny that in South Africa. But to say it's a white genocide is the narrative control part in order to push through this humiliation ritual. So apparently these songs are there from the apartheid times. There's fringe groups that still have that political party, and we get the answer from the South African president. So rather than me explain that, I'd like you to hear his answer, and hopefully we can get to the part right after where they've played the whole video, and they show all these cars lined up. What other people say, the journalists say, that was, there were deaths, and rather than this is 1,000 people that have been killed in those, it's actually just one of the services that the people are coming to from some of those tragic deaths and crime that's happening. So Azad, if we could get his answer after the video.
Now this is very bad. These are burial sites right here. Burial sites.
Thank you so much, President Trump. Annika Larson from ENCA in South Africa. Thank you very much for hosting us. What would you like President Ramaphosa to do about the situation we've just seen on the screen?
I don't know. Look, these are articles over the last few days. Death of people. Death. 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 Horrible death. Death. I don't know.
But you know that there are
Pick
black
anyone.
people who are
White
dying
South
the most.
Africans are fleeing because of the violence and racist laws. And this is all. I mean, I'll give these to you.
Like
so when you say what would I like to do, I don't know what to do. Look at this.
but-
White South African couple say that they were attacked violently.
President Trump, when will you go and see for yourself if it is?
Well, I could do that. Look, here's burial sites all over the place.
President Trump-
These are all white farmers that are being buried.
President Trump.
And he asks about a jet that was given.
My first
You
question
ought
is
to
about
be
African
ashamed.
We're not interested in the
You know, you are so bad. You're such a bad reporter.
If they're committing genocide, why invite them? So if they are committing genocide, why invite the South Africans? Why not?
May I finish, please, President Trump?
President Ramaphosa.
Mr. President
This
Trump,
is
may I
one
finish?
after another. This family was wiped out. I'm just looking.
Can we get a response from President Ramaphosa? Can you give us your reaction to those videos, Mr. President?
President Trump, could you?
Well, I
could
think
you
it's.
address
I think
black
the
people
videos are
dying
so.
more than white
No,
people?
no. When you look at the videos, I mean, how does it get worse? And these are people that are officials, and they're saying that kill the white farmer and take their land. That's what it is. And I have other friends in South Africa. I have people that left. One in particular that says you can't go there. He said they want to take your land. They take your land and they kill you. It's okay, and they say it's okay to do. Now we're going to talk about it.
We're going to.
But this is a tremendous look. This is story recent. These are all people that recently got killed,
Yeah.
and I don't know how it can get any worse. These are
President
okay.
Trump,
And you know the men that you saw, the people that you saw in that movie. Those are officials. Those are people that were in office. They had one march. They had a dance in your parliament, whatever you may call it, legislature.
But let
and
me
it was
clarify
terrible.
that.
Yeah.
Let me clarify that, because what you saw, the speeches that were being made, one, that is not government policy. We have a multi-party democracy in South Africa that allows people to express themselves, political parties to adhere to various policies, and in many cases, or in some cases, those policies do not go along with government policy. Our government policy is completely against what he was saying, even in the parliament. And they're a small minority party, which is allowed to exist in terms of our constitution.
But you do allow them to take land.
No.
You do allow them to take land.
Nobody can
And then
take
when
land.
they take the land, they kill the white farmer. And when they kill the white farmer, nothing happens to them.
No, there is
Nothing happens to
There
them.
is criminality in our country. People who do get killed, unfortunately through criminal activity, are not only white people. Majority of them are black people. And we have now
The
been
farmers aren't
utilized.
black. The farmers are not black.
We are
I don't
now-
say that's good or bad, but the farmers are not black. And the people that are being killed in large numbers, and you saw all those grave sites, and those are people that loved ones going, I guess on a Sunday morning, they told me, to pay respect to their loved ones that were killed. Their heads chopped off. They died violently. And, you know, I mean, we're here to talk about it, and I didn't know we'd get involved here. But I will say this, that if the news wasn't fake, like NBC, which is fake news, totally, one of the worst, ABC, NBC, CBS, horrible. But if they weren't fake news like this jerk that we have here, if we had real reporters, they'd be covering it. But the fake news in this country doesn't talk about that. They don't want to talk about it, but now they have to talk about it. But they won't. This won't even be a subject. They'll have him talking about why did a country give a free, think of this, why did a country give an airplane to the United States Air Force? Okay, the United States, not to me, to the United States Air Force, so they could help us out, because we need an Air Force One until that's Air Force One, it's being built. 2 of them being built. But Boeing's a little bit late, unfortunately. So why did they give us a plane to the United States Air Force? That's what that idiot talks about after viewing a thing where thousands of people are dead.
I'm sorry, I don't have a plane to give you.
I wish you did. I'd take it. I would take it. If your country offered the United States Air Force a plane, I would take it.
Okay. But coming back to this issue, which I really would like us to talk about, and talk about it very calmly. We were taught by Nelson Mandela that whenever there are problems, people need to sit down around a table and talk about them.
Well, there are
And
problems.
this is precisely what we would also like to talk about, including, of course, trade matters, investment matters. So the issues that concern you as the United States.
Those are all recent.
And
Those are all deaths.
Yeah, in many ways, I mean, one should say you are a partner of South Africa, and you are raising concerns, and these are concerns that we are willing to talk to you about. Let me just add quickly, you know, the criminality that we are experiencing in our country needs quite a lot of technological capability. And in one of our areas in South Africa, we're using US technology, which is able to, in many ways, identify where shootings are happening and all that. And I'd like to talk about that, because there is support that we can get from you as the United States to help us deal with all these acts of criminality. And that is what I believe partnership is all about. And we are here as a partner so that we can help each other whenever there are challenges. So I'd like us to discuss it, and of course outside of the media, so that we sit down and have a really good discussion that will lead to good outcomes.
Okay, let's take a... So one of the clips we skipped through was where he actually gave his answer. Unfortunately, we skipped through that. We're doing this in real time, and it's got a little bit dark. I've been going on a little bit longer, so we changed the set a little bit as well. But his answer was essentially that there are fringe parties. That's not the political stance, and he gave his answer. But then we move into suddenly, this message to the whole world and to the global south that if you come to the White House, then you could be sabotaged and have private conversations happening in front of the press in real time. And we will create a narrative around absolute gaslighting, like while America via its proxy Israel is committing a genocide, will accuse you of committing a genocide while you're taking those that committed the genocide to court, and we're suing you to make sure that you can't trial the genocide. I mean, just pure gaslighting, and you have to go through this humiliation ritual. And then suddenly the conversation, after explaining that it's not a white genocide, Trump pushes. Suddenly the whole conversation goes around surveillance, technology, how we get hold of crime, how we do that. It also connects to, people were asking questions about the Qatar plane and various other things. When we go through the final part, I'll connect the dots with Qatar and with the Iran negotiations and various other things. But just notice how suddenly this turns into a public conversation. So if you're from the global south, immediately what you're saying is, I'm not partnering with America on technology. I'm partnering with China. I'm going closer to BRICS. I'm not turning up in America. I'm not going to have one of these humiliation rituals. I can't even work with America because they sabotage you and publicly make up narratives right in front of you. And publicly in front of the press, I have to figure out how to either handle that or I'm in on it, whatever it may be. But recognize that this is all theater. And this is sending out a message to the world, Trump via his proxy, US, via its proxy, BlackRock's portfolio companies, that we want to transition the world to strengthen multipolarity. And anybody that wants to use US technology, this is the types of technology that solves these specific problems. Okay, Azad, let's I think there was like a section. What's it? Let's go through a couple more sections. I don't know where it goes next, but we'll forward through some more stuff if we don't think it's relevant.
Measures that could be in place should you not be satisfied that South Africa is fixing some of the very bad things, in inverted commas, that you tweeted are happening?
Well, there are a lot of bad things happening in many countries, but this in particular has been very, very bad, and because of we're going to have the whole world watching in another short period of time because you have the G20, and that's a big deal. And it seems like, I want you to look good. I don't want you to look bad.
Very good.
But we have hundreds of people, thousands of people trying to come into our country because they feel they're going to be killed and their land is going to be confiscated. And you do have laws that were passed that gives you the right to confiscate land for no payment. You can take away land for no payment.
I want to clarify that because we have a constitution. Our constitution guarantees and protects the sanctity of tenure of land ownership. And that constitution protects all South Africans with regard to land ownership. However, we do say, because we've got to deal with the past, the government, and as your government also has the right to expropriate land for public use.
And you're doing that.
And we've never really gotten underway with that. And we are going to be doing
you're
so.
You're taking people's land away
we have not.
from them.
We have,
and those people in many cases are being executed. They're being executed. And they happen to be white, and most of them happen to be farmers. And that's a tough situation. I don't know how you explain that. How do you explain that? They're taking people's land away, and in many cases those people are being executed, and in many cases it's not the government that's doing it, it's people that kill them and then take their land, and nothing happens to them. But we have thousands of people that want to come into our country. They're also going to Australia in a smaller number. But we have thousands of people that want to come into our country, and they're white farmers, and they feel that they're going to die in South Africa, and it's a bad thing. Yeah,
what can South Africa do? What concessions would you like to see them make to improve relations with the United States? Then I have one more for President Ramaphosa afterwards.
Well, we just spoke about, I got them a very, very complex machine, 150 of them. And I was asked by the president if he could help, and I did that. And, I have great feeling for all countries. I deal with all countries. But I have a great feeling for South Africa because I have friends. I have a couple of friends, a few friends here today.
Okay, not quite getting to the clip that I want. What I wanted in the beginning was his actual answer, because I don't think we've heard his defense. And then the second thing I wanted is where there was somebody that started saying, we need Elon Musk, we need Starlink and stuff like that. I don't know, Zard, what do you think? Do you think we can... I think we skipped his actual answer, so we haven't really done him justice.
Yeah, so we're... One second. Let's bring it back.
There's two main clips. The one is where he gives his answer where he says, this is a political thing, it's not our government. I feel like we skipped that, so
this was after... This was after the video that was being played, that Donald Trump told everyone to dim down the lights, and then they were playing.
Yeah. So they played the video, and then he got to defend himself and say what his explanation of what the video is. We're doing this in real time, so.
I mean, it's in South Africa. There's people. I don't know. Like it. Both sides of the road you have crosses. Those people were all killed.
Have they told
So
you
this is where
that
Trump's
is,
giving
Mr.
commentary.
No, I'd like to know where that is, because this I've never seen. I don't. Okay.
I mean, it's in South Africa. There's people. I don't know. No. Okay.
Thank you so much, President Trump. Annika Larson from ENCA in South Africa. Thank you very much for hosting us. What would you like President Ramaphosa to do about the situation we've just seen on the screen?
I don't know. Look, these are articles over the last few days. Death of people. Death.
I think Azad Trump's giving his answer, but I don't think we're getting to where he gives his answer.
Kill you. It's okay, and they say it's okay to do. Now, we're going to talk about it, but this is a tremendous... Look, this is a story recent. These are all people that recently got killed. In office, they had one march, they had a dance in your parliament, whatever you may call it.
That allows people to express themselves, political parties to adhere to various policies, and in many cases, or in some cases, those policies do not go along with government policy. Our government...
We may have skipped that part out in the edit. Apologies for that.
All right. Okay, sorry everybody. I think we've done a bit of a disservice. What we'll probably do is edit in his actual answer, because I feel like we've given him all the accusations without him saying what he's done. There was one more thing I wanted to cover, so we can edit that in. Thanks for everybody watching live. I wanted to cover when there was clearly someone that comes along and talks about Elon's technology and Starlink. Are you able to get to that, Azad, or should we edit it in after?
Yeah, we do actually have that part, but it was a very brief part. I can forward it to that. Let's try.
Yeah, so there's someone in the audience and starts talking about how it's the solution.
Fixed. That's when it will get fixed. But people don't talk about it. And I'll tell you who's talking.
President, if you had to wind all of those tapes properly, you will see I'm the biggest target of that rabble-rouser. Number one for over 10 years, Mr. Malema. In fact, the first time I met him, he was in the youth league with that gentleman, and look how he's changed.
Right.
We have too many deaths, but it's across the board. It's not only white farmers, it's It's across the board. And we need technological help. We need Starlink at every little police station. We need drones. I actually got drones donated for the peace parks to stop elephant and rhino poaching. And his predecessor stopped the importation because he said the United States would spy on us. I mean, US basics, the ridicule. So if you can help us. Remember, sir, you and I lived in New York in the 70s. We never thought New York could be what it became. 2 commissioners, a tough mayor. We need your help to stop this awful killing. But it's across the board. Ernie is right now building a house in George. I'm building 3 cottages for my grandchildren on a farm outside Grafrenet. I often go to bed without locking the door. And we have a serious problem with illegal aliens who stream across the border. And if you really look at our statistics, a lot of these murders, firstly it's unemployment and illegal aliens. And then I met Vice President Watts many years ago.
Okay, Azad, I think we haven't.
My wife,
I think we'll end there.
Loved.
Okay, yeah, that didn't work too well. By the way, what happened here is we were originally going to do a video with Burkina Faso. And interestingly, I saw a video and it turned out to be AI, thought it was originally. So I kind of threw a last-minute video that we'll watch instead, and we didn't have time to prepare too well. So we'll try and fix that in the post-edit. But essentially, you know, it highlights, you can decide either there is a white genocide or there is a problem with crimes and murders that are happening, and it is being spun into a different narrative in order to achieve a strategic goal. And it just so happens that the solution is that you need to use Elon Musk's technology. And you also get a public demonstration that everyone in the global south don't work with America, go work with BRICS and China. And I think this is, you know, the ritual in order to usher in the change the BlackRock essentially wants, and the portfolio companies, including Elon, want as well. And so, you know, I hope you get to see that the sheer insincerity and theater, and that when you follow the money, you can get ahead and you can understand the different types of things. And so then you don't need to listen to them, and you can make sure that you do what is right in your interest. So rather than, I'd like you to make yourself great again. And then what I'd like to do is a final part for the final little section here. I'd like to go through some of the announcements that happened this week in geopolitics, how they relate together, and then a really, really important message, because I really believe that right now there is civil unrest being manufactured. And I think that there are psychological operations designed to make people mentally weak and psychologically weak as a result of everything that we're witnessing from having to witness a genocide in real time, the most recorded genocide in real time. So anyway, one of the reporters in the interview focused on the fact that Qatar had paid for a plane. And that plane was for allegedly replacing Air Force One for the White House. And then the accusations were that it gets transferred to Trump after his administration. And so people can see that for what it is. But immediately this week, we got an announcement after Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia, to Qatar, and to UAE, which I covered in last week's episode. Trump asked Qatar for help in reaching a positive outcome in the ongoing negotiations with Iran. Now, what is interesting about this is there was like social media that are going crazy, but Qatar and America have worked together for a long time. America's always had a military base in Qatar. And while they're always telling you that Iran funds Hamas, Hamas is a resistance movement against the illegal occupation that America funds via its proxy Israel. And their political wing office has always been in Qatar. And there was an interview with the Qatar leader stating that America was always okay with this office. And actually, they always wanted it to be there because it's actually Qatar that backs financially the resistance. And it's not so much Iran. There is Iran that backs it as well. But you're always told that it's just Iran. So when you follow the money, you get a slightly different story. And so, you know, this the resistance that is fighting against this genocide, you can see the types of games and media narrative that's being played. We also know, if anyone was paying attention on October the 7th, that Biden was weaponized in order to push the beheaded babies narrative. And if you go through the posts that I put through with the documentary Atrocity Inc. on my blog, you can see that that was complete fake news and where it came from, as well as all the fake news about the mass violence, sexual violence. I don't want to say the word that might get us censored. And you can see that that was all manufactured. And once you understand this, you understand how these operations work. You also know that because the Israeli government has fallen apart, the head of chief of war admitted to killing their own people by implementing Hannibal Directive, where mass Apache helicopters by Israel ended up firing on the Raven party that was happening, that wasn't meant to be there. And we know that the hostages, that everybody that is in Israel normally needs to work for the IDF and therefore was a prisoner of war. And we know that there were 10,000 hostages taken by Israel, Palestinians before that. When you combine all of that, you understand the types of false flag operations. I'm not saying it didn't happen. It happened. There was mass violence. But we know it's not what we were told. And they're still using that narrative in order to justify the genocide that's happening right now. And I've covered in previous broadcasts why. So US knows all about that. So why are we being told that it's Iran? Today we got an announcement that the US and Iran are holding their another round of nuclear talks in Rome. And Trump says that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. You're told that this crazy Iran that wants to implement Sharia law all around the world, that throughout this whole thing has been acting in compliance with international law when the attacks happened on, or the retaliation attacks to the strikes within Iran by Israel. When they responded to them, they told United Nations, they told US, they broadcast, and they didn't kill any civilians. And so all we've seen is Iran trying to normalize, because we know that prior to this, there was the normalization. China normalized between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And Trump implemented his Abraham Accords, which was to sidestep Iran and to sidestep a Palestinian state. And Saudi Arabia said, we can't join that until there is a Palestinian state. And so Iran said, we need a Palestinian state. Qatar was funding, the resistance. There were massive, massive lies around what happened. And so I believe, I've covered this in previous broadcasts, don't want to get too deep into this, but why is Trump saying you can't have a nuclear weapon? Because there was always going to be a nuclear deal. Because China had already normalized between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And this was always about nuclear energy. And Trump's visit with BlackRock portfolio companies was always about the artificial intelligence and robotics trade, based upon BlackRock's portfolio of companies that needed a multipolar world and America to be shrunk into a regional power, which is why they influenced the process of having Trump so that he could implement BlackRock's process of tariff policies that isn't going to make America great again, isn't going to help Americans, just like there was the operation to strategically weaken Europe and get UK to guarantee all of the loans that were needed for BlackRock to take over all the land in Ukraine, and America to get the rare earth mineral deals for the companies that needed it for their electric vehicles like Elon Musk, for the military industrial complex that is sharing their technology to usher in how to steal money from Europeans, British people, and Americans, create more inflation, and use these big, beautiful bills in massive corruption, crony capitalism, and fool people into thinking that this is about being British first, European first, and America first. Because those same companies and those globally multinational corporations don't give a shit about you. And when they want to manufacture civil unrest, they can manufacture that civil unrest. Because this is actually all about nuclear energy, not nuclear weapons. This is all about manufacturing narratives that lead to the justification for selling more weapons. This is all about the settler colonialism, which is why Britain and America created Israel in the first place, to create the violence that was needed to not allow the region to unify around their resources, to always create divide and conquer. And because Saudi Arabia and various other power structures like China didn't allow a central bank in their region, and because they managed to build enough economic power by partnering around their resources and giving in to the dollar and setting up the petrodollar, they didn't end up like Gaddafi. And now, because the financialization of all of the American assets and the selling off and prostitution of all the politicians and the fake democracy and the fake capitalism, the Federal Reserve debt-based Ponzi scheme managed to redistribute all of those companies where BlackRock has a board position and create a new stateless structure where all of the different structures underneath it managed to culminate in this $20 trillion of assets where our politicians no longer work for us. And people are trying to figure out, why is there no infrastructure? Why has China and Saudi Arabia got all this infrastructure? Why are they paying less taxes? Why are they not creating so much war? Why are we getting inflation choosing between eating and heating when all that's happening is we're signing 100-year agreements to allow BlackRock to take over Ukrainian land and killing all around the world for the profits of these different complexes? Because our governments are no longer sovereign. There is no MAGA. There is no MEGA. There is no make UK great again, make Europe great again. There is just the extraction of data, which is what Elon was there for in the first place. There is transitioning to a technocracy, and we are in a centralization versus decentralization. And the only reason we're getting to discover this stuff is because there was actually sovereignty in the BRICS layers, sovereignty in the GCC layer, to create a competing force against the BlackRock layer that is currently weaponizing and utilizing, asset stripping everything from Europe, UK, and America for the optimum portfolio value of the BlackRock share price. So that we can then take this nuclear power and usher in a wave of AI and robotics. And the reason this is happening is because there was a resistance, and China put together a normalization plan that was the opposite of the old forever war plan. So that leads me to my belief that we are witnessing right now a genocide because Netanyahu just wants some strategic points and is in order to negotiate his own freedom. And there is actually just a negotiation between Iran and Saudi Arabia around that nuclear energy and BlackRock. And BlackRock and Iran and Saudi Arabia representing these different factions, the GCC aligned with BRICS and America, America being a proxy for BlackRock, BlackRock being a proxy for its portfolio companies, are actually just allowing this genocide and starvation campaign to continue because people are trying to figure out what the end game looks like. And Netanyahu's just negotiating his freedom. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia represents the GCC in this. And ironically, the Israeli regime kind of represents what the Iran deal looks like. Because I think the GCC and Iran are on the same page through China. BlackRock and America have been strategically retreating because remember the three things I said in order to have peace in the Middle East: normalization between Iran and Saudi Arabia, a Palestinian state, which comes after we've got this final negotiation around what the nuclear deals looks like. And that nuclear deal is the final step. And I believe after the nuclear deal has been announced, we'll get the normalization, we'll get the ceasefire, and we'll find out what the end negotiation network is. And that's what I think we're witnessing right now. And this just shows you how inhumane everything is. They'll trade genocide. And you know what? This has been happening all along. We just haven't been able to witness it on camera. We just didn't have the technology because Telegram was created that allowed the Palestinians to share the videos. We just didn't have X and a desire to contribute to these artificial intelligence algorithms to give us freedom of speech where they could no longer control the narrative, but then they turned that into not having freedom of reach. And so this what makes me believe that despite the humanitarian crisis, I believe we're in the final stages at some point. And Netanyahu is just trying to negotiate his freedom. And he'll probably get away with it because he is holding up the deal that's already been figured out between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And US will be retreating, but when the terms are being negotiated. And that's why we had the trip around what AI will be given, what robotics will be doing, what deals will be doing, because nothing is as it seems. And they just need us to believe the stuff that they want us to believe. And of course, Trump is going to get credit for creating Abraham Accords 2 at the end of this. But the reality is, this is the decolonization. And the covert wars and the violence was all about resources. And it required multipolarity in order to put an end of the dominance of the hegemon propped up by the dollar proof of weapons network that now has BlackRock and the network of portfolio companies essentially as their CEO underneath it. And the strategy was always divide and conquer and fund fake groups and create fake narrative and control media in order to manipulate, divide and conquer, weaponize racial tensions, weaponize religion in order to make sure that nobody could unify around their resources. And that was always the strategy. That was the post-Bretton Woods world order. That's how the dollar became the world reserve currency. It was propped up by proof of weapons, death, destruction, violence, rape, pillaging, in order to prevent competition. And now that very same force, those that profited from it, that managed to vassalize the US, EU, and UK, are strategically weakening And they're using the same tactics that they used to weaken the Middle East and weaken the global South. And they're using it against their own people right now. The same colonial tactics. Divide and conquer. They use that to carve up the Middle East. And it looks like, from what I'm seeing in Britain, from what I'm seeing in Europe, and from what I'm seeing in America, is this being used as well. And it looks like they're going to use the same strategy because GCC and Saudi Arabia is going to be the new power brokers in the region, and they'll get rid of Israel because Israel was just about radicalizing the Jewish people into believing that they were fighting for a worthy cause when they were ethnically cleansing the Palestinians. And now we've got to get through all of this stuff because they use that in order to create a fake war on terror to fund the groups that were the militias that were funded by the West in order to steal the resources from the Middle East and from Africa. And now they partnered and built power, and there was enough resistance against that where finally China was able to come along, build BRICS, unify with the GCC, and put together the terms and conditions that lead to the expulsion of US from the region. But now we have this non-stateless power called BlackRock that has vassalized. And now there is no US government. There is no UK government. There is no European government. They have a deep state mechanism, the layer 3 thing that I've always been sharing in other videos. Layer 1 is the printing of money for the shareholders of the Fed. Layer 2 is the intelligence network that launches black op criminal covert operations for the benefit of corporate power and creating funds that are funneled in a money laundering network so that you can have money that sits outside congressional, parliamentary, fake democracies and fake capitalism. And the third layer is the government, and the government is a vassal for that power structure. And now that power structure has become more and more powerful because of the Federal Reserve System. And that's why we are in a decentralization versus centralization mission. And that's why they can commit a genocide right in front of us and then accuse South Africa that was defending from the genocide and push the narrative into saying they're committing a white genocide in order to turn crimes into racial narratives and religious narratives so that social media can be used and media can be used in order to get people within the West to hate each other, fight against each other, and they can pay agents. Yes, Jordan Peterson, we see what you're doing with these different types of narratives that are being pushed through. We can see what's happening here. It's the same playbook that was already the West was doing on the rest of the world. It's the same one that was put in Ukraine, divide and conquer. It's all these different narratives that we're seeing on social media. You know, the Jewish conspiracy, Jewish rules the world. Zionists are in a fight for their survival because Jewish people need protecting. Protecting from who? Protecting from America, or Europe, where many of the immigrants came from originally. Are you saying it's not safe enough in your country? Why is that? Is it because you're fueling white nationalist movements? Is it because we're fueling all these different narratives because people are trying to figure out why they're broke? Because of this theft? Because of the debt-based Ponzi scheme? Because different operations are used to serve big pharma, like shutting the whole place down and forcing everyone to inject themselves, where the share price pumps like crazy and now is 95% below. And who's already borrowed the money from Bank of Japan to make that? This is a criminal network, and it requires. And you always would use the weaponization of the different faiths. And now you're pushing out that narrative of that the Muslims are taking over and they want to implement Sharia law. And people who have been in these wars and watched their children and parents and grandparents killed by the same people that were saying they were defending democracy, that turned against their own people because they don't give a shit about you. And then they create Operation Mockingbird in order to pay the media and say that anyone that finds this stuff, call them conspiracy theories, make them feel weak, weaken their mind, psychologically destroy them, make them feel like they're speaking absolute rubbish because these operations happen behind the scenes. UK was always the beta test, and we saw what they needed to do when they wanted to have border policies, manipulate politics through racial tensions, create civil unrest by taking the people that were affected by these policies of stealing people's money and making them choose between eating and heating, and then fueling religious tensions. And then what happens this week? Suddenly, 2 Israeli staff at the embassy are murdered in Washington. One of them is a German Israeli that worked for the IDF, still does, maybe. I haven't had too much time. I don't have a theory on what this is right now, but I'm suspicious by it. That's all I'm going to say right now, because I don't have enough information to know. And then we're told that his Christian girlfriend, because we have this Judeo-Christian relationship, and the Muslims are the radicalists that are killing people, and we have invaders in our border that want to implement Sharia law and take away our freedom as a result of the false flag operations that the CIA, Mossad, and MI6 created, like 9/11, by having their CIA agents that justified wars and led to this fake war on terror where you're weaponizing all of these different faiths in order to psychologically traumatize people. Suddenly we're told that the alleged shooter, which I have maybe real, maybe not, is shouting "Free Palestine." And look, I'm not going to say whether this is a false flag or not, because I don't know, but I do know the patterns. But even if it's not, you know, there'll be plenty of conspiracy theories, and the truth will be fought in the end, and we'll find out what's happened, and you'll tell us that any false flag didn't happen because you never admit it and never release the files like the Trump administration said they would. They won't release those files. The Epstein list still isn't here. But it would not surprise me if it was a false flag operation. I'm not going to say whether it is or not because I don't know, quite frankly. But let's just say that it's not. Let's just say it was a lone gunman and was politically motivated. And I'm not saying I think it's a bad strategy if you're politically motivated and you turn to violence. And I'm not condoning any of that violence. I think it will work against it. In fact, it is being weaponized. This is just a narrative that they want to utilize. They don't care about the deaths. They have this high ground saying, oh, we care about preventing anti-Semitism that is manufactured and created. But imagine if you, for 600 days, have been watching a genocide, as we all have, and I'm not talking about the fake media version. I'm talking about the real version, the one that where you actually see the genocide that was created by Israel, which is a US proxy, in order to determine what the region actually looks like, that led to this multipolar world order. And it was the most documented genocide that we have ever seen, where every single day we have to watch graphic images of burnt children. And I'm not talking about Jewish children. I'm talking about Palestinians. Beheaded children. I'm not talking about the fake news that there were. I'm talking about the real ones, which is the Palestinians that we've been seeing. We've been seeing the prisoners in Palestine with protests around right to, I'm not going to say that word, sexual violence and everything that we have seen. And that it has been the most documented genocide in history where we have had to watch things that I never imagined I would ever have to watch. I, for one, know the impact that this has personally had on me. Daily massacres, daily gaslighting, daily lies. We're being told that it's the complete opposite of how it is. Right now, just now, today or yesterday, whatever it was, this week, Israeli soldiers just shot European diplomats. Massacres every single day. Hundreds are happening right now. Over 60 days of starvation. There's children, babies that are there looking like, you know, you can see all their bones right now. And they're pretending we're letting in tons and tons of aid when the world knows that that's not happening. Oh, Hamas is subdiverting them. We know the truth. And you've got to make sure you understand the truth. Because what they did there and what they're doing to the Palestinians, I always said this will be utilized against you if you don't stand on the right side of history here. This is the beta test. I believe it's being used right now, and they're seeing and beta testing what they can get away with. Israel's killed more journalists so that it doesn't get reported. Netanyahu right now is explicitly with his cabinet saying in no short terms that they need to eliminate all of the Palestinians, completely wipe them out. This is not the language that they were using in the beginning. The South Africa case said everything that they were saying that led to the rulement that this is plausible genocide, and it will be ruled as genocide. And that's why this is being distanced against itself, because we had to watch this. No, you know, in talking about the largest amounts of gaslighting, obvious. And if you're not paying attention and you're just watching the media, and everybody knows it at this stage, there is no blown up every hospital, targeted and killing nurses, doctors, so that they can't get the treatment that they need, deliberately preventing water, electricity, everything from getting in. This is not about, and we know what the negotiations were. Hamas said that they would enter into a negotiation, return all the hostages. The Israelis protesting in Israel right now know that they're protesting because they know their government doesn't want the hostages returned. They want them ethnically cleansed. They want them genocided. They want to do whatever they can get away with. And at the very same time as us having to witness this, we have to watch Trump invite the South African president and accuse him of genocide while they're launching the case against the genocide. Do you know what this does to people? Do you know what this does to people? For 600 days, they have put their life on hold to try and tell make people realize what's happening here. While Trump's pretending to be outraged against this white genocide, theatrics. Do you know what this does to people's mental capability, psychological strength? It's pure gaslighting designed to anger, designed to drive mental problems, designed to take people on the edge and drive them to the very type of behavior that they would never imagine themselves doing. This was people that were already, after the mass injections, the lockdowns, the inflation, the global financial crisis, the wealth, the confiscation, all of these different things, the mass indebtedness. These are all people that were already on the verge of a mental breakdown, if not veterans that came back homeless, addicted to drugs because they didn't get the support that they needed. This is the same suffering that we're witnessing right now, but has been done all along. 1 million civilians in Iraq that Julian Assange, thanks to Bitcoin, was able to reveal on WikiLeaks, and the banks and financial institutions blockaded it and tried to wipe him out and smear campaign him through Keir Starmer in his career before he was installed to send all this money over to the military industrial complex, pretending that he's defending democracy, was used in order to smear, sexual violence campaigns on Julian Assange. People are suffering from mental illness after all this. This is psychological illness. Look at the numbers. These are record numbers of drug addiction, record numbers of prescription addiction, record numbers of suicide rates, record numbers of indebtedness, record numbers of all of this, mental illness, all sorts of stuff. At the same time as being under mass economic pressure because money's being stolen through the proof of weapons network. When people were traumatized by the lockdown and the forced things that ended up taking both of my parents' lives because they fell for being told that they're killing people if they don't inject themselves with that untested stuff. Can't prove it. I'm pretty sure what happened. There's an intuition here. People are barely holding on at the moment to their sanity. And they're having to watch this. This feels like the complete social engineering of people. And we know what they do to other countries. They're doing it on their own countries right now because this power structure has become stateless. There is no America First agenda. There is no European first agenda. There is no Britain first agenda. It's just pure gaslighting. And how do you control people that are at this stage? It's like, how much mental abuse can you put people through? It's like some kind of mass experiment that we're seeing. How much destruction can you gain? You know, you took the people that were standing up against this and you told them, you're banning boycotting. You can't boycott Israel. They made it your right to boycott and not fund this thing. They banned it. They clamped down on protesters. They infiltrated the protests. They said, if you're supporting against this genocide, you're supporting terrorists and therefore you can be deported. They deported protesters. They infiltrated that. They shut down universities. They took heads of universities and rugby scrummed people to the ground and replaced them with those that are, you know, and all they were doing is they were protesting against, we don't want our student tuition fees to be sent to Israel to fund genocide. And the whole time, the West, America, UK, Europe, Israel, ignoring international law. They were trialed as war criminals, plausible genocide. We saw all the cases. The entire world said Palestine needs to be free. America veto voted it and said, no, 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 pretending that they were trying to negotiate a deal when the CIA was there all along representing its corporate interest. They ignored international law. They didn't put any sanction instructions. They just ignored arrest warrants. So you're being told that the only strategy that works is the one that they're doing. Violence, genocide, murder, killing, mass destruction. You're sending out a signal that that's the strategy that you use because all the peaceful means no longer work. You can't peacefully protest. You can't boycott. And so what do you do when someone on the verge or the end decides to probably do either a false flag and was able to do that, or they did it genuinely? And they did it for political means because they believed that this was the only thing that they could come up with to stop having to watch children being mass murdered, burnt alive, killed, and all the atrocities that we've had to watch for almost 600 days. Could you blame someone? I'm not condoning it. It will be used against them. It's a bad strategy. But what do they do with that anyway? Now they suddenly think that this is a tool, this is a strategy. They're not talking about all the other people that have been killed. They haven't been talking about the murders that happened to Palestinian children earlier. What about the other types of murders that are happening? Suddenly this one's got political leverage, so they can use it. They can use it to do exactly what they did in UK. Manufacture civil unrest, divide and conquer, escalate within its own country. At the very same time as we're seeing billions and billions of dollars being sent to war criminals to commit crimes against humanity, and they're just defending them on the media. Congress claps like crazy, standing ovations. They're basically signaling that lawless violence is the only legitimate strategy that they're using. So when somebody else decides to use it, I'm not justifying it. Stick with the law. I don't recommend anybody do this. But can you understand why they came up with that's the only thing that they've got left? Because they're manufacturing civil unrest. We've seen this before. The very same people that are willing to take down towers on their own people in order to get the Patriot Act and fund war, because they don't care about you. They're fueling tensions, and they're exploiting the political leverage that comes from that. For them, it's just an opportunity. They don't care. They'll push anti-Semitism. They'll push Muslim hatred. They'll push Christian narratives, whatever they need to do. And all of that was manufactured for profit. And now we're entering into a multipolar world where we might be able to fight against it. We might be able to. The lesson that we're learning here is when people and countries have sovereignty, they're able to push back against it. When people don't have sovereignty, they end up with no economic power and a hostile takeover. So the lesson from this whole thing, when you combine this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, this week in geopolitics, is just wake up, see what they're doing here. We need more and more people to understand this game. The game has always been divide and conquer, the very same strategies that they used on the global south, that they used on the Middle East, because they built enough economic power to fight back and remain sovereign. That's the only reason why we're getting a retreat. And the only thing that works here is when you can become sovereign enough so that you can become economically powerful enough that one day you can actually gain some power through your economic power to fight back against the system. And what do they want you to do when Bitcoin provided that tool for everybody? They said, own it with us. So that's the lesson. Boycott the Fed by owning Bitcoin. Boycott BlackRock by holding it in self-custody. Boycott the military-industrial complex by paying down your debt, not taking any new debt, and not borrowing against your Bitcoin so that they can margin call you and fund all this death, destruction, and war. Support multipolarity. And recognize that there is changes in capital, and you need to react to that. And if you stay addicted to a narrative that they've sent to you, it's all about divide and conquer. Because here's the reality of what's really happening. We are transitioning to a world where Bitcoin's sovereignty is giving people economic power to beat against this proof of weapons network. We are transitioning to a world where they don't care about you. They are weaponizing narratives in order to usher in the next wave of artificial intelligence and robotics so you don't have jobs. And you've got a small window to adjust to this and recognize that you need to get on the right side of history, and you need to build a plan for yourself and your family to embrace the fact that we're moving into artificial intelligence and robotics. That's happening. There's no stopping it. That's happening on a few fronts. If you fight it, there's no fighting it. You'll be wrecked at the end of it. So make sure you utilize it as an opportunity in order to make as much fiat currency as you can, and then save as much Bitcoin as you can, so you build your power so that you can then spend local and you can actually use what is the real lesson here. If the government's not the power, who is the power? It's the multinational corporations, which is represented by the new Dutch East India Company, which has been represented by structures like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard right now. But what do they listen to? The very same things why they're manufacturing consent that you don't do right now. Boycotting. Using your money when it costs them money, they listen. When we redirect the flow of money, they listen. That's the only thing that has worked. And engaging in the political process is not the right enemy. That's the PSYOP. It is actually the new Dutch East India Company, and they only listen to you becoming economically powerful, and the way you beat their system is Bitcoin. And the way you don't give them the power is holding it in self-custody. They'll create VC-backed shitcoins to try and end up with staking networks and various other things because they want you to give them the stake. We're swimming with sharks now, but this is the decentralization versus centralization. And so always remember, you're alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Some are going to get wrecked, others are going to do really well. It's by understanding who we're actually fighting against that we can do it with peace, love, and unity, because Bitcoin proof of work is providing the resistance for the proof of weapons network. And when we follow the money, we can get to the truth. And I'll keep doing that with Bitcoin, this week in macro, this week in geopolitics. Sorry for the sudden flip to the videos. I hope you learned something from it anyway, because they are manufacturing civil unrest. And when you see the patterns, you can beat the patterns. And all you need to do is not buy into what they're saying, look at what they're doing with their money. And Bitcoin was the gift that was given to us in order to protect yourself. That's why it's reaching new all-time highs. That's why they had to adjust to it. And that's why I'll see you this time next week. If you could share, subscribe, like, get this message out to as many people. We'll break it down. I'll do what I need to do. And I'd like you to get this message out to as many people as possible to protect themselves. Sign up at simondixon.com. Join my free newsletter. I'll keep coming back. And next week, we'll cover Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 83. And we'll try and keep doing it with peace.